The discriminant, if you remember from the test that you have on Monday, that you've already got everything on it memorized, I'm sure. It's b squared minus 4ac. What this tells you, I've got the thing that says equal to 0, greater than 0, less than 0, less than 0, greater than 0, all that stuff. On the side, something else the discriminant tells you is whether or not something can be factored. If the discriminant is equal to it could be equal to 0 for, if it's equal to 0, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. What do all these numbers have in common? I can do what with them? Can't divide 25 by 2, but I can do what? I can take the square root of all of them and they're perfect squares. 0, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on. So if the discriminant is a perfect square, then I can factor it. If it's anything else but a perfect square, so if it's negative or it's equal to like 5 or 2 or some number I can't take the square root of, then it can't be factored. That's where you would write prime down on that paper. So most of the time, I don't know all the ones that can't. I don't know which all ones can be factored, but I don't think there's many that can't be factored. So if you can't figure out how to factor it, you can do b squared minus 4ac, and it'll give you. If it doesn't give you a perfect square, then it's prime. You can't factor it. Okay. So bear with me when I'm explaining this, because most of you can factor fine if this number in front of x squared is 1. That's really not the problem. It's what happens if there's a number that's not 1 in front. Right, that's where we run into a problem. So what we're going to do is practice when the number in front is not 1. And there's an easier way to do that than what I've seen for most of you that you're trying to do. But you need to know, the first thing you need to know is the standard form of the polynomial. This is kind of the standard form. It's ax squared plus bx plus c. This is a 6, by the way, in case you're wondering. So, in this polynomial, I'm going to write a is 10, b is 23, and c is 6. Now also what you need to remember, if this was a minus sign, if this was a minus 6, then that would make c what? Negative 6. So if it was negative or minus 23x, that would make the b negative 23. That's important to remember. So now what we can do is some people use an X chart, all right, and that's fine if you've seen it as an X chart. The T chart that I'm going to make is the same thing as the X chart. I don't know what. I noticed 1 or 2 people doing an X the other day, and that's fine. I don't care which one you use. I'm going to use a T just because I know that's just what I'm familiar with. I don't care which one you use. They all have. It's the same thing. So what we need to do first is multiply a times c. And we're going to put that in the upper left corner. We're going to put a times c in the upper left corner. That's what we want to do. And then I'm going to put b in the bottom left corner. And that's just to give me a better. It's just a way to keep my thoughts organized as all this chart is. And because just to remind you of the 4 things that you need to have to factor. The a times c part is a little different than what you used to or what you've taught. I don't know how. Alright, so we need to multiply a times c together, and that gives me 60. Alright, so make sure you use the signs. So if this was a negative 6 and a positive 10, I'd put negative 60 there. The signs are very important. And that eliminates you having to think as much about what parentheses has what sign. So make sure you carry the signs with it. We'll do an example with the negatives here in a minute. All right, then B is just 23. We can put it in that box. So now I have to ask myself this question. All right, what two numbers can I multiply together and give me positive 60 and add together and give me positive 23? That's my next step. This is the only part where you kind of maybe have to guess and check if you're not super familiar with the factors of 60.
And 20 times 3. So that's like equal the number that you're adding, and that's equal the number you gotta.
Yeah. So 20 times 3 multiplies to give me 60. Alright? Then 20 plus 3 is 23. It has to meet both of those qualifications. It can't just meet one or the other. It has to meet both of those. So has anybody got any questions on that? Here's the after that, you're done with the guessing and checking part. All you've got to do now, when we factor something, we're going to have two parentheses, right? Does everybody understands that part of this? All right. So to find the two parentheses, normally that you'd do something different if, like, the way I've seen some of you try to factor. So what we're going to do is I always make two fractions. Right? Since 10 is what's in front of my polynomial up here, I'm going to put 10 on top of both of these fractions. Sometimes I put 10x. It doesn't really matter. I just need a 10 on the top of the fractions. Sometimes you'll see it with a 10x up there. Alright, so then I'm going to take my two numbers and put them on the bottom. So put 20 on the bottom of one and 3 on the bottom of the other. And the reason I'm doing this is going to help me get the numbers in front of x that I need. Alright, because in both parentheses you're going to have an x, right? I mean, it's just when you factor, you're going to have an x in front of the parentheses, or in the parentheses. This is going to help me to figure out what numbers need to go in front of x. Because when I multiply these first two things together, I need to get 10x squared, right? Does everybody understand that's my goal? Alright, so these fractions are going to help take away the guessing and checking. All I've got to do is simplify these fractions. 10 over 20, same thing as 1 over 2. Because 10 divided by 10 is 1. 20 divided by 10 is 2. So that's just simplifying fractions. Can I simplify 10 over 3? No. Nothing goes into 3 and 10. Except 1, but that doesn't count. Alright. So now, in this first parentheses, I have 1x, so I could put a 1 in front of the x. But you don't have to, but if you want to, you can put the 1 there. And then it's a positive 2. That's why you've got to make sure you get your signs right here. Because this was a positive 20, even when I simplify, it doesn't change the sign. So it's a positive 2, so there's a plus 2 in the middle. So with this parentheses over here, this 10x didn't simplify into anything. So 10x is still going to be in my parentheses. And it's going to be what? Plus 3.
Isn't there something to do when you make your parentheses like...
Okay, so here's another one that has some minus signs in it. But I don't want you to think about the rules as far as this is minus, so signs are different and all that. I don't want you to worry about that. Alright? I just want you to make the t-chart. So A times C is 6 times negative 4, because this is a negative. This minus sign, treat it like a negative. 6 times negative 4, so I'm going to have what in the upper left? Negative 24. What's going to be the B? Negative, whatever that is. I don't know what that is. Negative 10. Okay. So negative 10 is going to be the B. So now I've got to figure out what two numbers multiply to give me negative 24 and add to give me negative 10. So you agree that it's supposed to be 12 and 2. Yeah. Negative 12, because when I add them, I need to get a negative 10. Alright? So by doing that, I've already got my signs for my parentheses. I don't have to think about it any further than that. That's as much as I have to do as far as the thinking goes. Okay. Now I've got to simplify my parentheses. So 6 is in front on both of them, and I'm just going to put the X there because it's just a habit. So I got 6x and 6x because there's a 6 in front there. I'm going to put negative 12 under one and positive 2 under the other one. And then I need to simplify both of them. Alright, so let's look at that. How can I simplify this one?
Over -2.
Yeah, 6 goes in there one time, 6 goes in there 2. 2 goes in there one time, 2 goes into there 3. So let's look at that. We got, so what's my first parentheses going to be?
1x minus 2.
1x minus 2. What's the other one going to be?
3x plus 1.
3x plus 1. Alright, so let's stop here. This brings up an interesting point. If I multiply these first two terms together, I get what?
4x.
Well, 1 times 3 is 3. 3x squared. Does that give me what I wanted at the beginning? No. Here's why. This is the most common thing that you see in fact, like factoring, like if it, because we did all this right. So if it ever happens like this, because sometimes I don't see it, and I do this, and then when I go back out, I realize that, oh well, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I started with. Look back up here at the top. Is there a number I can pull out in front of all these? Pull out of all those? What can I divide all three of these numbers by? 2. So if I divided all three of those numbers by 2, I'd have a 2 on the outside. So 2 times 3x squared minus 5x minus 2. So really, this polynomial in red is the same as this polynomial in the pinkish purplish color. Okay, because so really what I need to add out here in the front is what? A 2. Now on the ACT they will try to trick you sometimes, and they'll put this out here. They'll put both of these out here, all right, without the 2, and then they'll put one with the 2. All right. So which one do you need to pick? The one with the 2. Now, if I were solving this for 0, like if I was setting that equal to 0, all right. When you're solving these, you don't need the 2, because I could set 2 equal to 0. Doesn't make any sense. I can't set the 2 equal to 0. But if I set this whole thing equal to 0, up here, just up here at the top, and I divide by 2 to get rid of the 2. 0 divided by 2 is what? 0. So when I'm solving for 0, I don't have to worry about the 2. Alright, I just need to set each of these parentheses equal to 0 and be done with it. But if they ask me for if I'm factoring it, if I'm just having to factor it, then I need all three of them. But if I'm solving it for 0, then don't worry about the 2. Just set each of these parentheses equal to 0. So I'd have x minus 2 equals 0 and 3x plus 1 equals 0. And I'd have two different answers. So x would equal 2 and x would equal negative 1/3. They both have a p. So I can, just like I did with that 2 in the previous problem over here, when I pulled the 2 out there, I can do that with the p in this problem. So I can factor, it's like I'm factoring a p out. Alright, and I've got 16 x squared minus 81 y squared. So anybody got any questions on how I pulled that p out? Alright, now this looks like one of the most common factoring situations that you'll ever see. Alright, and I put this formula on your sheet that's on your quiz on Monday. What is this? Does anybody know? I'm going to tell you if you don't, but does anybody recognize what it might be? So, there's a minus in the middle. It's a difference of squares. Well, I see I've got x squared and y squared on both sides. How I can tell if something's a difference of squares is that I can take the square root of what's on both sides of the minus sign. Can I take the square root of 16? Yeah, it's going to take the square root of 81. Well, I know I can take the square root of x squared and y squared because they're squared. If this was to the 4th or to some even power, then I can take the square root of it. So x to the 8th I can take the square root of. X to the 10th I can take the square root of. If it's even, I can take the square root of it, if it's a letter. If it's a number, I just got to know if it's a perfect square or not. So, if I can take the square root of both of them, Alright, my difference of squares, I'm going to have two parentheses. One's going to be plus and one's going to be minus because this is the formula that you've got on your paper. That's how it works. I'm going to have the same thing on both sides of these signs. Both parentheses are going to look the same other than the plus and minus side. So what's the square root of x squared? It's just x. What's the square root of 16? So 4x is going to be in both of these parentheses.
Oh yeah, I remember doing one of these.
Yeah. So what's the square root of 81? 9. The square root of y squared is y. If you have two letters, alright, this is what you need to look for. You need to see if the two letters are side by side in the middle. And you need to see if the last letter is squared. Alright, if it looks like that, it could be A's and B's, or X's and Y's, or M's and B's, or whatever. Whatever. If there's two letters in it, there's an X and a Y. There's an X squared and a Y squared, and the two terms in the middle. That means it's going to factor normally like we always factor. Alright? So what we need to do, alright, if I want you to think, so I'm going to go ahead and make the parentheses. We're not going to put anything in them right now except one thing. You know, we always have these x's here, right? Like we know that when we factor something, we have the x's, correct? Does that make sense to everybody? Because when I multiply these first two terms together, I get the x squared. Right? Well, since there's an extra y squared in these parentheses, what do you think the second term's going to have with it?
Wow.
There's going to be an extra y there. All right. So, but I don't want that to confuse you. All right. So what you need to do, you're going to have that there in the answer, but factor it exactly the same as if the y wasn't there. So I'm going to rewrite this without the y. I'm going to rewrite this without the y. So I'm going to factor it like the y is not there. Just when I make my parentheses, I'm just going to add the y to whatever the second term is. So now it's just a normal factor problem like we've been over before, except it almost looks exactly the same as the one that we did a while ago, except the 6 and the 4 are switched. Alright, so what's something I can pull out of all three of those? A 2. Alright, so I can either do it now or later. It doesn't matter to me. I want to go ahead and do it now. So really, instead of factoring 4x squared minus 10x minus 6, I want to factor 2x squared minus 5x minus 3. So now my a is 2 times my c is negative 3, so that's negative 6 and negative 5. So what two numbers multiply to give me negative 5? Multiply to give me negative 6 and add to give me negative 5. Well, no. Alright, let's do, if I multiply negative 2 and negative 3, well that adds to give me negative 5. But what is negative 2 times negative 3? Positive 6, so that doesn't work. I can't use those two.
No, I got you.
Well, negative 5 and 1, you're close. It's negative 6 and 1. Because negative 6 times 1 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. So that's the two numbers I want. Says anybody confused on where we got those numbers from? So now I want to make my two parentheses. Instead of using this 4, though, I'm going to use the 2 because this was the polynomial. I used this polynomial here, so I'm going to use the 2 with my fraction. So 2 and negative 6 and 2 and 1. Alright? So 2 goes in there one time, 2 goes in there 3. And I can't simplify 2 and 1. So up here at the top, my parentheses, 1x minus 3. And since the y was in the original problem, the y is just going to be stuck there at the end. So it factors the same way, other than the y's. This is a very common problem on the ACT. And then 2x plus, and you can put the 1 there for the y, or you can just leave it as y. You don't have to have the 1's there. But what's the only thing we're missing out of these two parentheses up here at the top? What do we need? We need that 2 that we pulled out right there. So my answer is that. I want to distribute the 3 to everything. So x to the negative third to the third, have a power raised to a power. Y'all should have already learned this. Is what do I do with the two exponents? Multiply them together. So that's negative 3 times 3 for my new exponent of x, which is negative 9.
You don't multiply the number.
12. Why is 12? Because 4 times 3. And then 2 times 3 is 6. Then this other parentheses, I don't have an exponent, it's just, so I'm just going to multiply all this stuff together. So now I can only multiply them together if they're the same letter or they're both a number. So I can multiply 4 to the third and 3 together. 4 to the third is what from your sheet that you on your test Monday? You remember? Yeah. 4 to the third is what? 64. 4 is 64. 64 and 64 times 3, you can work it as 192.
We were close.
Alright. Then, now when I multiply the two x's together, if I multiply 2x, like x to the negative 9 times x to the 5th, I have to add the exponents.
Substitute of the year. She was hot.
Negative 4.
She was a retard, but she
Yeah.
was.
Then if I add negative 5 plus, listen, 12 plus negative 8 is 4, and then 6 plus 4 is 10, so c to the 10. If I have a negative exponent, where has it got to go? I don't want a negative exponent.
Under the function.
It goes under a function.